Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Angela Stent. I'm director of the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this conversation with our distinguished guest, Igor Ivanov, former Foreign Minister of Russia. When we first discussed the possibility of Mr. Ivanov speaking here, which was a few months ago, I think we didn't realize how topical this talk would be today, since so much has happened. In the past few weeks, Russia has been very active diplomatically, as we all know. It's taken the initiative in organizing the UN effort to rid Syria of its chemical weapons, as a result of which military action has so far been avoided. The US-Russian relationship remains difficult after the Snowden case, but Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov are in constant contact over Syria and other challenges that our countries jointly face and can only resolve by working together. Those of us that were at the Valdai International Club discussion meetings a couple of weeks ago heard President Putin talk about his project for the Eurasian Union. This is another important aspect of what Russia is doing at the moment. We also heard some representatives from Moldova and Ukraine talk about pressure that was put on them not to sign an association agreement with the European Union. So there's much to discuss, much more than that to discuss today. And we're delighted to have Mr. Ivanov here. He's a graduate of the Maurice Thorez Institute of Foreign Languages. He joined the Soviet Foreign Ministry in 1973. He spent a decade in Spain, later becoming ambassador to Spain. He was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs in 1998, and he served in that position until 2004. He then served as Secretary of the Russian Security Council until 2007. He's a professor at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, and he is president of the Russian International Affairs Council. So please join me in welcoming Igor Ivanov.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. I am professor also in the Moscow University of International Relations, and what we are doing now in our council, Russian Foreign Affairs Council, is not only work on different international problems, but also try to engage young people to our job. And we have relations with more than 10 universities around the Russian Federation, from Vladivostok to Kaliningrad, and preparing special programs for them. Because I think that the main thing is today to explain to young people quite difficult international problems with which we are dealing today in international relations. For example, before coming here, we had meeting with people from Global Zero about all nuclear problems, and my impression is, maybe I'm wrong, that young generations sometimes don't understand well what does it mean nuclear weapon, what threat it can create for everybody, and why it is so important and urgent to go ahead with the old process of elimination of nuclear weapon. And later I will speak about Syria. I think that the importance of our agreement between our two governments, Russian and American government, about chemical weapons in Syria, is that it may be the first step, if everything goes well, in our further cooperation in many other areas, in weapons limitations and in mainly in destroying the weapons of mass destruction. And but maybe I will speak later about this. As I said, for me it's an honor and a privilege to be here and to have this meeting with you, because Georgetown University is one of the most distinguished schools where they teach and study global affairs. Georgetown faculty has played a leading role in setting contemporary standards for international studies. Georgetown graduates have contributed a lot to shaping the modern international system. The suggested topic of my presentation was Russian foreign policy in the 21st century. And such a topic should be very comfortable for any speaker. When you talk about what might happen in 20, 30, or moreover in 50 years from now, you take absolutely no risks. Unfortunately, the situation in the world evolves in such a way that when thinking about the future, we need to clear our horizons by sorting out what is going on now. Therefore, I'd like to set a more modest goal for my lecture, to give you my understanding of the current state of the international system, the place of Russia in this system, and the special role of US-Russian relations in global politics today. Today, everybody talks about Syria. Let me start with Syria as well. In my view, the Syrian crisis is a graphic illustration of the pure state of the modern international system at large. A bloody civil war goes on in the center of the Middle East for more than 2 years and a half. The costs of the war in blood and treasure climb higher and higher every month. A return to normal life becomes more and more complicated. With the conflict going on, with more blood being spilled, moderates of both sides lose ground, and extremists are getting stronger. Moreover, the civil war has already turned into a regional conflict with direct or indirect involvement of a number of neighboring countries. We all know that any further delay in dealing with the conflict is going to be detrimental to everybody, to Syrians, to Middle East, to the global security at large. If nothing is done by the international community in the nearest future, Syria is likely to turn into a failed state, no matter who will run the place, with a ruined economy, broken infrastructure, paralyzed political institutions, and plenty of military hardware floating around. This morning we had a meeting in Atlantic Council, and with Lord Robertson, who was former Secretary General of Nato and the American Ambassador Haas, we discussed this Syrian issue, and it was interesting that we coincided practically totally in our evaluation of the situation today in Syria and possible consequences. Though Syrians themselves are to take a fair share of responsibility for the continuous bloodshed, the conflict also reflects the shameful importance of international organizations and the international system at large. Is the Syrian crisis exceptional? Unfortunately, it is not. There are many other symptoms of a more general problems. The modern international system has an evident deficit of governance. We keep accumulating new and new sources of regional and even global instability. Since the end of the Cold War, not a single major international conflict was successfully resolved, be it in the Middle East settlement, state building in Afghanistan, Iraq, or Somalia, security in the Korean Peninsula, and so on. Some of the conflicts were ignored, others were dealt with, but mostly unsuccessfully. The history of recent international interventions, from former Yugoslavia to Iraq, from Afghanistan to Libya, suggests that those who decided to intervene had not mastered their abilities to foresee all the consequences of their actions. You don't need to look into the crystal ball to predict a lot of security problems that we will have to handle in coming years and decades. The current trends are not reassuring. There has been a sharp rise in the number of local and regional conflicts in the world over the past 2 decades. Found hopes that the end of the longest and greatest geopolitical confrontation of the 20th century would automatically lead to world peace, stronger international security, and radical disarmament have not come to pass. The threat of the entire humanity perishing in a nuclear conflagration may have receded dramatically, but wars on a smaller scale are now killing a lot more people than they used to. Most experts agree that this trend will continue. We are going to see new crises, new conflicts, and new casualties. And this trend means that all of us clearly fail to meet our responsibilities in maintaining international peace and stability. The Cold War did not end yesterday, and not even a decade ago. Is 2 decades not, if 2 decades not long enough for tensions accumulating during the Cold War to subside? How much longer do we have to wait until the world returns to the normal state? Why does the residual potential for conflicts in world politics keep getting stronger instead of becoming a spent force? Now that the world has entered the 2nd decade of the 21st century, do we still have the right to blame our problems on the difficulties heritage of the previous century? The situation is something of a paradox. Responsible politicians in Washington, Brussels, Beijing, or Moscow have very similar views on the global challenges and threats to international security. We all think along the same lines. We are being kept awake at night by the same problems, and the proposed solutions we come up with are not much different. I don't want to oversimplify things. Not all our opinions can be reconciled to produce a common approach, but this way or another, we are all united by the shared challenges and threats we face. This is our reality, and it is unlikely to change anytime soon. It would not be an exaggeration to say that today we have a global consensus on matters of international security, something we did not have for the most part of the previous century. One would have thought, therefore, that the task of restoring the governance in the international system is a merely technical challenge. One would have thought that in a world not being turned asunder by irreconcilable differences, the shared fundamental interests of the key actors should inevitably lead to the creation of efficient cooperation mechanisms. But we have to admit that such mechanisms are either absent or inefficient. A shared security space remains a dream. The world seems to be moving toward greater unity, but the number of conflicts remains stubbornly high. Needless to say, the transition to a new international system cannot be easy or painful. There are many independent variables at play here that complicate this transition. The changing balance of power between old and new centers of international influence, and new military technologies, global inequality, and the explosion of trans-border migrations, revolution in global communications, and accession of non-state actors in global politics, and so on. But the independent variables cannot and should not be used as an excuse for human shortcomings and errors. The lack of vision, temptations of populism, interference of domestic politics, deep-rooted institutional interests, these are just a few manifestations of the human factor that prevent us from moving ahead. Nobody has a magic clue to solve all international problems at once, but it does not mean that we can put these problems on a shelf. Let me share with you some of my ideas based on my experience as a statesman and a diplomat. I believe that we need to upgrade the whole set of global governance that would give us adequate instruments to cope with security challenges of different types. The challenges are complex and multifaceted, and our responses to that challenges have to be complex as well. The very top of the structure belongs to the United Nations, which remains the most inclusive, the most legitimate, and the most experienced international organization dealing with problems of international security. I know that many politicians and scholars in this city are quite skeptical about the United Nations. Indeed, it is easy to criticize United Nations for complicated decision-making procedures, for excessive and extensive bureaucracies, for inability to resolve many burning international problems. UN is not perfect. We all know that. But it only means that we should all work harder to make the United Nations more efficient, more flexible, and more adequate to meet the security challenges of the 21st century. Where should we start this work? There are many ideas about how to reform the United Nations Charter, how to bring new members to the Security Council, and so on. I tend to believe that this is not the right way to approach the problem. To make the United Nations more efficient and more productive, we need, above all, change our attitudes to the institution. Unfortunately, the United Nations is often used for promoting short-sighted interests of particular states or group of states, or as a storage place where you can deposit most complicated and hard-to-manage problems, or as a PR outlet to make a nice speech and to score points within your domestic constituency. In my view, we can change UN only if its members, and above all great powers, will put their particular interests aside and commit themselves to work together in order to resolve pending security problems. Naturally, United Nations cannot do it alone. An interconnected network of regional security institutions should shoulder the United Nations in building a new security regime. However, these regional institutions should seek to assist United Nations and not to replace it. When they start acting without a United Nations Security Council mandate, like it was in the case with the NATO military action in Yugoslavia, or interpret the United Nations mandate in an arbitrary, self-serving way, the case of the operation in Libya, they undermine their own legitimacy and can, in the end of the day, generate new problems rather than produce lasting solutions for international crises. Let me underscore once again, I am not against NATO. I am not against any US-led alliance. I am only against these alliances trying to position themselves above the rest of the international community. The same approach, and to confirm my words, I will tell you, and today we spoke with Lord Robertson. 2 years later, after the war in Yugoslavia, against which Russia was strongly opposed, we signed the agreement with the NATO, creating Russian NATO Council, demonstrating that we want to cooperate with NATO, but on the basis of international law and framework of United Nations. It means we understand that this is reality. We may like it or don't like it, But this is reality, and we have to accept that reality. The same approach, in my view, should be applied to ad hoc coalitions. You know, a lot of ad hoc appear in different regions or with different problems, which get together in order to address a specific security problem or a particular crisis situation. The evident advantage of this ad hoc organization is that that coalitions can be assembled very fast, and each participating party can freely decide on the scale and on the format of its involvement in such a coalition. I participated in many ad hoc groups in Balkans, for example, so-called contact group, or also it's ad hoc about 5+1 about nuclear Iranian problem, or group of six in Korean Peninsula. It means and there are quite a lot ad hoc groups, and they do, from my point of view, positive job. But ad hoc coalitions like regional security institutions cannot and should not try to replace the United Nations in terms of the decision making. Without a clear and unambiguous UN Security Council mandate, ad hoc coalitions' actions, no matter how benevolent they might look, turn out to be detrimental to long-term interests of international security. Finally, we should not underestimate the role of bilateral agreements between major powers in promoting regional and global security. If bilateral relations, for example, between Russia and the United States or China and Japan, experience problems, the whole system of international security feels the negative impact. Tensions and risks tend to affect other international actors. However, if these bilateral relations are constructive, stable, and predictable, their positive impact on the overall system of international security is also quite significant. And later I will speak about the possible positive impact of Russian-American relations on the international security system. In the modern interdependent world, security is indivisible. Nobody could benefit strategically from a new confrontation between great powers. To sum up, the emerging system of international security, as I see it personally, can be compared to a pyramid with the United Nations and its Security Council at the very top of it. The second layer of the pyramid embraces major regional security organizations and international institutions. At the third level, we have ad hoc coalitions and flexible international regimes to handle specific dimensions of international security. And finally, the bottom of the pyramid consists of multiple interlocking bilateral agreements, treaties, and other arrangements between states. All layers are interconnected, and each of them is playing its own specific role without trying to replace or to undermine all others. This structure may look complicated and hard to manage. In my opinion, it can be successful only if there are fair, clear, and universally accepted rules of the game to serve it. In other hands, the rule of international law is critical. The role of international law is critical. Like in case with the United Nations, there are many critics of the contemporary system of the international public law. And the criticism is in many cases absolutely justified. However, the imperfection of international law should not be an excuse to ignore it or to interpret it in a self-serving way. I am convinced that only working together we can modernize international law and develop it further so that it would fully reflect the new realities and new challenges of the 21st century. The challenges of the new century is particularly serious for countries that have to undergo a dramatic domestic transformation along with changes in their foreign policies. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia has been one of such countries. I am not sure that in the West they fully understand the scale of the national drama that the Russian society had to live through. It would be only natural to see a lot of inconsistencies, omissions, illusions, and sheer blunders in the Russian foreign policy over the last 20 years. Nevertheless, as a person who has been actively engaged in the foreign policy making for all these years, I have to state that we have been able to avoid most of pitfalls and mistakes along the way. In my view, a lot of Western interpretations of the Russian foreign policy are not accurate and demonstrate a lot of political bias. Let me approach a number of typical Western myths about the Russian foreign policy. Myth number one: Russia is an isolationist state. It's often argued that the post-Soviet Russia has avoided active international cooperation, has been very skeptical about international organizations and multilateral arrangements. Moreover, it is claimed that the Russian leadership is very much concerned about globalization and would prefer to keep the country as isolated from the outside world as possible. I have to say that nothing can be further from the truth. Since the Soviet Union disintegration, Russia acquired membership in all most significant international organizations and groups. I will enumerate some of them: G8 and WTO, the Council of Europe and IPEC. It signed agreements with Nato and with European Union, entered IMF and the World Bank, participated in the creation of G20 and BRICS. In fact, Russia is the alone country in the world which is member of G20, G8, and BRICS at the same time. Of course, in all these institutions and arrangements, Russia tries to promote its national interests, which might create tensions with other states. But the main function of multilateral organization consists exactly in reconciling the divergent interests and identifying common denominators. Russia has always been ready for a reasonable compromise. Myth number two: Russia is a global spoiler. The perception is that the main goal of the Russian foreign policy is to make life harder for the West at large and for the United States in particular. Allegedly, Russian leaders create artificial problems, block important international decisions, flirt with ROCA states simply because they regard their US counterparts as enemies and they look at the international system as a zero-sum game. Regretfully, such view on the Russian foreign policy is very popular in this country. But can you give me a single example of Russia's actions as a spoiler? As a former foreign minister, I can state that there was no single case when Russia purposefully tried to damage US security interests or to complicate life for US politicians. Of course, sometimes we disagree with our American partners. If we do on matters like the NATO enlargement or ABM treaty or anti-missile defense system in Europe or intervention in Yugoslavia, we try to explain our position. Isn't it a normal practice for any responsible international player to explain its position? Myth 3: Russia is turning to the east away from the west. It is argued that the Russian leadership has been disappointed in its cooperation with both the United States and the European Union, and therefore is looking for non-Western alternatives as China, etc. But are the old notions of the East and the West still valid in the world of the 21st century? Can Russia as a global power limit itself to only one geographical priority in its foreign policy? Are various foreign policy directions mutually exclusive or, on the contrary, complementing each other? I don't want to say that Russian foreign policy makers have been perfect all the time from the end of the Cold War. But the overall directions of the Russian foreign policy was always been toward a deeper integration into the international system, friendly relations with its partners, and constructive engagement in solving common problems. However, in our interdependent world, a lot depends not only on what you want to accomplish, but also on what other international actors allow you to achieve. The US approach to Russia in this regard is a very important factor. The United States remains a priority for the Russian foreign policy. We hope that Russia is a foreign policy priority for the United States decision makers as well. In our view, leaders of Russia and the United States have a special responsibility for confronting this global destabilization and building a new system of international relations. And I will explain why I think so. First, the relationship between Moscow and Washington formed the axis of world politics in the second half of the last century. And although the Cold War is in the past, it caused numerous problems that continue to poison international politics to this day, generating distrust, crises, and conflicts. Russia and the United States share the primary historical responsibility to overcome this Cold War legacy as soon as possible. Second, Russia and the United States remain the only countries in the world capable to destroying each other and the rest of the humanity. Therefore, issues such as nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and the prevention of nuclear terrorism fall primarily on the shoulders of our two nations. This is a moment to recall that our two countries are leading players in the global arms trade, which cannot but impose serious political and moral obligations on our both countries. Third, for many historical, geopolitical, economic, and other reasons, Moscow and Washington almost inevitably become involved in the most pressing regional issues of the day, be it in the Balkans or Caucasus, Middle East, or Asia-Pacific region. The global arc of instability transects areas of vital interests of both countries. Fourth, our two countries are caught up in many of today's global problems. Our countries are the world's leading energy producers. Today I read that now United States is number one and our country Russia is number second, but it's one and second, it's very near. Yeah. Our countries have a very significant impact on the global environment and climate. The United States and Russia are in a position to do more than other states to confront growing cyber threats and promote effective international cooperation in space exploration. Is the current level of Russian-American relations adequate given the scale of the challenges we face in building a new system of world politics? Unfortunately, the answer has to be in the negative. Relations between Russia and the United States remain shackled by old ideas, archaic principles, and the mentality of the bygone age. Even the reset declared 4 years ago, for all its achievements, cannot claim to be qualitatively very different from the Soviet American detente of 4 decades ago. However, the leaders of Russia and the United States today have a unique opportunity to bring relations to a new level, to finally free ourselves from the burden of the past and confront the problems we face and those we will face. First, we need to engage in a serious discussion of our shared vision on this new system of international relations and global security architecture. We have no doubt that the prospects for world politics look different when viewed from Moscow and Washington. But we are also confident that our two countries share similar long-term strategic interests. The differences in specific positions should not be dramatized. They can exist even between very close allies. Nevertheless, disagreements, no matter how complex and painful, must not block the development of ties along other lines. It is essential not to interrupt dialogue even on those issues where their positions differ substantially. The existence of communication channels is always better than their lack, even if the chances for formulating a common position at a given moment seem to be minimal. At the same time, the sides could make a more active use of the new opportunities for cooperation that are opened by Russia's admission to the WTO, long-term development programs for the Far East, Arctic development projects, and international energy projects. Something has been done there in the past several years. However, that is not enough. There is need for large-scale projects and the more active involvement of private business and independent research centers in this process. The world will not wait for Russia and the United States to speak with one voice on strategic issues of this future world order. Our countries must demonstrate their commitment and determination to cooperate on the most pressing concerns that humankind faces today. One of these problems could be the civil war in Syria. We are confident that joint effort between Russia and the United States, combined or parallel pressure from Moscow and Washington on the major parties to the conflict, be they Syrians or external, will bear fruit. And the success of bilateral initiative on Syria, in turn, would be a powerful incentive for Russian-American cooperation on other issues. I have no doubt that sooner or later, Russia and the United States will become partners in building a new system of international politics in the 21st century. But I would like to hope that this will happen in the very near future, as the price of delay may be too high. Thank you very much. I have, but I don't know if it works.
Is it working? Would you like to sit down for the questions or stand?
I will stay here.
Okay, fine.
If it is possible. May I stay here or?
They stay there. So, yeah, you're passing around the microphones. Are there questions? Well, while you're thinking, let me ask you.
No question. This is the.
Let me ask you a question, and we'll go to some of the other questions. One of the burdens, I think, on the U.S.-Russian relationship is the legacy of the 1990s. Sit down. How do you think, how can we work together to overcome that legacy of the 1990s that obviously for Russia was a difficult time, as you said, and still burdens the U.S.-Russian relationship?
Well, you mean 1990s after the disintegration of the Well, I think that we had good and bad experience. I don't want to say that everything was bad. And I will give you examples. But my impression is, I discussed a lot with my American friends, that the big mistake of some people here in Washington was that they gained the Cold War, and it was a reason to create unipolar world, trying to impose their opinion and their position on other countries, including Russia. It was a mistake, unfortunately, because I think that after the Cold War, we all of us, we had very good chance to start a real process of constructing new system of security, international security. It was clear that new Russia, with all problems of Russia, was not enemy for the United States. And it was clear that the United States it was not intention of the United States to attack our country. The ideological and political and economic incompatibility disappeared. We started to share with differences the same values. We started to construct our economy on the basis of market economy. And it was clear that we had that possibility. We discussed many times with our American and Western partners. But unfortunately, I repeat, my impression is that their evaluation of the situation was different. And as the consequences, we had the military strike in Yugoslavia. And after 78 days of bombing Yugoslavia, also in Brussels, they understood that it was impossible with bombings to resolve the problem of Yugoslavia. And they asked also us and other countries to sit together and to prepare political settlement. And we participated in that political settlement. And after that, in peacekeeping operations together in Bosnia, I was in Dayton also, and one of the co-chairs of Dayton process. The same thing, and I repeat, but we made a lot of demonstrations that we wanted to start new chapter in our relations. And I repeat, the main thing, for example, was in 2002 in Italy, the creation of Russian NATO Council. I will tell you frankly, you remember the composition, how strong the opposition was in our Duma. And I was in Duma, and for me it was very difficult to explain how it was possible to have relations, to sign treaty with the alliance, with the bloc, which 2 years before bombed Yugoslavia. How it was, people cannot imagine how in Central Europe you may do this. But I explained, and I explained what does it mean, NATO. NATO, this is the alliance of countries. We have good relations with France, with Germany, with this, with that, and let us work, and in work we shall demonstrate it. The same thing about enlargement. I asked today former Secretary General of NATO, do you feel that we are all, after the enlargement of NATO, we feel more secure? I don't think that we can say, give me a positive answer. With the enlargement, we are not more secure because it was old thinking. It was necessary to sit and to realize new challenges and new threats and see what we can do together against it. And one good example was after September 11th, during the military operation in Afghanistan. When we were together, for example, Russian leading so-called Northern Alliance, we were supporting this part of ground operation and Americans and other air strikes, we reached victory immediately. It demonstrated working together it was possible. But unfortunately, we lost the second chance after Afghanistan. It was possible to create strong international coalition with strong international vision about security. But we lost it in 2003 with the military operation in Iraq. And what we see today, who is happy what is happening in Iraq? Every day people dying, every day dying, and we don't know how many people died now after the war. More than during the war. It means I don't what happened happened, but we have to analyze objectively. I repeat, maybe we committed also some mistakes, but we have to have positive, not positive, but correct conclusions from where we are now. Now we see, and I repeat, Syria is very important point, not only as Syrian conflict, but as the demonstration that when we reached agreement, this is only political agreement. It is very difficult to implement that political agreement. Immediately, all countries said, this is the way how to deal this conflict. I repeat, it will be a lot of problems to realize that resolution. We understand perfectly well. But I think that the first step, it was positively accepted in the world, because people understand that only Russia and the United States together, they can do this. It means to eliminate chemical weapons. And if we do this successfully in Syria, it will open the possibilities to work together in many other places and in other conflicts.
My name is Vitaly Shpak. I'm a Fulbright student from Ukraine. My question is on Russian policy towards its neighbors, and in particular to countries that are moving to signing the association and free trade agreement with the European Union, and I mean Armenia, Moldova, Ukraine, and of course Georgia. There is an interesting fact here that it's been proved by various researchers, including the one conducted by Eurasian Development Bank, that in fact joining the free trade agreement by those countries is economically beneficial for Russia. So it looks like the reason why Russia is doing what it is at the moment lies only in political perspective. So my question is, why is Russia so reluctant to accept that it has lost the control over the former Soviet republics, and why doesn't Russia allow to move and to make their own decisions? Thank you.
Well, first of all, Russia cannot allow or not allow. We can only recommend. We don't have political, economic, or military capacity to allow or not to allow. This is the first point. The second, I think that as it was mistake from my point of view, the enlargement of NATO, the same mistake may be to create new lines of division in Europe. Instead of such agreements, it may be good or bad, I think that the best way would be to speak about common market. Why Europe and the United States started negotiations about the creation of common market? And why in Europe we cannot create common market? If we create common market, then Ukraine, Moldavia, and other countries will be part of that common market. And today, the impression of some people in Moscow, is that the main intention of that agreements is not interests of Ukraine or Moldavia, but is interest to have to separate that countries from Russia, because it's clear that with this agreement, this is not the ticket to be members of the European Union. It's clear that the enlargement of European Union will not come soon. And it's clear that Ukraine is not the first in this line. You have Turkey, and let us see how Turkey will be accepted in European Union. That's why that agreement, I repeat, is not the ticket to enter to the European Union. That's why I think that I am against some statements in our country of some politicians saying that Ukraine has to decide, Ukraine with Europe or with Russia. I don't think that this is correct position. Ukraine is where it is. It is between West Europe and between Russia, and Ukraine has to have good relations with Europe and good relations with Russia. And I think that this is the main idea of many Ukrainian politicians in Ukraine, because I know them and I speak with them frequently. That's why I think that it was not good idea, and I know who invented that agreements, and I said them. It was not good idea because you created problems for that country. If you wanted to have a special relations, a special conditions with Ukraine, for example, you had signed bilateral commercial or other kind of agreements, and not to, because this, as I understand, this is now, instead of economic, it's more political problem today. That's why I think that it's not necessary to dramatize this issue. I think that Ukraine is an independent sovereign country, and Ukraine decides by itself if it's interested to sign agreement. I think that in November in Vilnius they will sign. This is what as I understand, maybe I am wrong, and the life will continue. There will be relations. It will be necessary to arrange some things because legal, economic, and other. But I had experience when, for example, Eastern and Central European countries decided to enter to the European Union. It was not easy because we had to revise all economic agreements with previous, which worked with the Soviet Union. And at that moment, the main thing was to avoid negative consequences for both sides. And I think that we found a solution. And the same thing it will be here. I don't think that this is big political problem for Europe or for any country.
Hello, my name is Robert Thomas. I work as a contractor with the Department of State. I'm curious what you think the most significant impact the rise of China on U.S.-Russian relations will be.
Well, as you know, there are some speculations that Russia wants to use relations with China against the American interests, or the United States want to use China against Russian interests. I think that all of our two big countries, two big international players, we have our national interests. But at the same time, we have common interests, and the main thing is to have good channels of cooperation. I don't see problems from China for Russian-American relations. I think that when it is possible, it is necessary to engage China also in our dialogue. For example, with the NTI, Nuclear Threat Initiative, next year we shall start one of the programs about the security in Asian Pacific region, inviting China. Russia, it will be Russia, United States, and China. And I think that such a dialogue will be, this is the best way how to deal and how to avoid speculations that one country can use the other against the interests of the third.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jesus. I'm from Mexico. Well, thank you for
¿Cómo
the
estás? Bien.
Bien, gracias.
Bueno, yo te contesto en español.
Thank you. So, I have two questions. The first one is you talked about how Western society does not really understand the struggle and the drama that the Russian people went through in the last decades. And I would like to have more explanation on this so we could actually understand. And the second, it's that you've also been speaking about how we need to move further into a new ways of dealing with international relations. Something that it's very remarkable for me when I'm listening to your lecture, it's that I feel that the past generation to us, the generation of the Cold War, has this concept of the security being so important that security will further bring development. But I think that our generation that was born after the Cold War, we don't understand it that way because we believe that they both build each other at the same time. So my question is, apart from the BRICS alliance and apart from the G20, what is Russia doing and what is Russia going to do on development for developing countries and for third world countries? Because this is important for security. And the Syrian crisis is just proving how development and welfare can then bring security and not in the opposite way.
Well, about the tragedy of society after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, I will give you some examples because I think that it's better to understand with concrete examples. During the Soviet Union, we didn't have any generation lived during the market economy. In Central Europe, you had generations before the Second World War living in one system and after the Second War another. That's why for them the transition was easier. For us, can you imagine people as myself, for example, all the time studying in the school, university, and thinking that the capitalism will be destroyed and in the world, in all countries, the socialist system, state economy will gain. Next day saying, no, it's not true, everything. Well, for young generations with 20 years, maybe with 25 years or 30, they can change not only mind, but the style of life. But for people with 40 or more years, it was dramatic. How they can find in market economy their position, their job? What can they do? Because during the Soviet period, in socialist system, your future was guaranteed by the state. Study, health, university, job, pension, and the other, yeah, everything was guaranteed by state. For you, it was easy to live, thinking only about your culture, about education, about how to do, but now it's different. And some people can accept this, but for many people, it was drama because without knowing how to live in that new system. This is social problem. The second problem, political. All our generations, mainly after the Second World War, were proud that our country was a big superpower, one of the two superpowers with all possibilities. Well, this is the psychologically important. And in one day, I was working at that moment I was chief of minister, minister, I was chief of staff of Minister of Foreign Affairs. Well, with a lot of information. And I was also surprised then in a very short period, such a big state, superpower, disintegrated. It was also a strike. For people, it was not easy to accept how it could happen. And I can enumerate you many other. For example, we had all education was state education. And without paying money, the health, it was 100% health, the system without paying money. And now you have half with more and more private sectors, and it's not easy. That's why it was really not easy to in very short period to have such dramatic changes. And speaking about the Cold War, during the Cold War, the system was clear. It was created after the Second World War. It was clear. The world was divided by two blocks, military political blocks. They had their rules. It was good or bad, but it was clear where you had red lines between that blocks. That's why with all international big crises, we avoided the big international real crisis. After the end of the Cold War, the situation in the world was such that new challenges, new problems started to appear, but international community cannot manage them because we didn't created mechanism to deal with that problems. Mainly local conflicts, mainly the problem of extremism, of many other modern challenges which we maybe didn't have during the Cold War. And how can you create such a mechanism? Also speaking about development, only creating the new forms of dialogue and trying to elaborate new forms of cooperation. G20 is one of the examples. During the crisis of 2008, countries decided to create this form of cooperation. This is one of the forms, but only transitional. We need something, we need to reform the international economic system, because this system was created after the Second World War. We need to reform also political mechanisms. It means, but how you can reform? You cannot wait that somebody will do this job. We, countries, we have to understand that these problems will be not resolved by somebody coming from outside. We have to do it. If you take, for example, as example, I always say, if you read the campaign, presidential campaign in any country, in the United States, in Russia, in France, in Germany, all candidates speaking about social problems, speaking about some concrete issues of today, but nobody speak about the future system of international relations or mechanisms, because they think that they have short period, 4 years. And this is maybe after that, next guy will come and will do this job. We have to do it now. That's why what I am saying in my conference, that this is my idea. There may be other ideas, but it's necessary to start to speak about these issues, because you will have more and more problems, you will have more and more conflicts, and if we don't have mechanisms, we will fail everybody.
Hi, my name's Doug Grant. I'm an MBA student here at Georgetown. My question's regarding Iran.
Iran?
Yes, sir. In the event that the U.S. comes to the UN looking for military action, what criteria do you think there would be where Russia would possibly support that and not use their veto power? And if not, do you think that Russia would be willing to tolerate a nuclear Iran?
Why don't we take a couple now? Because that and then the third one.
Hi, my name is Frederico. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I'm an alumni here from the School of Foreign Service. To expand on your answer and his question, you talk a lot about this, the need for a new system. You talk about the UN on the pinnacle of the pyramid. So I would ask, what's your idea? Like, how do we make the UN a better place? Like, is it expanded Security Council? Is it the end of the veto? What are your ideas for it?
Hi, my name is Roey Haydar. I'm a freshman in the School of Foreign Service, and I think my question will actually go pretty well with the ones that have been said, because it's also concerning intervention. I mean, I know you've been pretty forward in your opposition to U.S. intervention without UN approval in the cases of, like in the Balkans and in Libya. And I know there was an instance, I think it was in South Ossetia in 2008, where Russia, I mean, they also did a humanitarian intervention like the U.S. did, but the U.S. and the U.K., I believe, vetoed it. So I'm wondering if you think there's also a double standard in Russia intervening on a humanitarian grounds without UN approval, while criticizing the U.S. for doing the same thing.
Well, speaking about Iran, first of all, I don't think that there may be military intervention in Iran. And I will explain you why. I think that today we see a clear possibility to start this serious political dialogue with new president of Iran, Mr. Rouhani, about how to resolve satisfactorily the nuclear problem of Iran. I had negotiations with Mr. Rouhani when he was the Secretary of Security Council during the President Khatami in Iran, and we agreed at that moment the moratorium for 3 years on the nuclear investigations. It means we have positive experience with Rouhani. Now the main thing from my point of view is to coordinate the position of all all members of the group of 5+1, and with common position start negotiations without losing time. And in the case of Iran, the success story in Syria may be very good example how to deal with that issues. Iran is big country, very big country. I was many times in Iran. You cannot realize any military operation. We see what is happening in Afghanistan. We had our bad experience as Soviet Union sending troops to Afghanistan 10 years. NATO now has experience with military presence. And what will be result next year? Next year, when NATO troops will leave Afghanistan, there will be the same conflict. There will be the same power of Taliban. It means that the only military operation is not the solution. Long-term solution can be only political. Sometimes it's necessary to use force, sometimes not, but final solution, long-term solution can be only political. That's why I'm sure and we are ready to cooperate. I will tell you, I personally came to Washington trying to convince, and I convinced the Bush administration to join us in this group 5+1, because I'm sure that without Americans' participation, we cannot resolve this issue. And also without Chinese participation or Europeans' participation. That's why only working together. And if you ask me personally, is it possible? It is possible. And now it's good chance and good moment. And I think that it's very positive that the President of the United States and the President of Iran, they spoke, they had not direct but indirect conversation. And it's good signal, and I expect that we will have developed. Now speaking about United Nations. You may take a lot of information about different suggestions how to improve the mechanisms of United Nations, starting with the Security Council and other bodies. But the main thing, what I was trying to say, the main thing is to understand that we cannot create something better. Impossible. We have to improve what we have, because we created this institution after the Second World War. The world is totally different today. And we have to, when you have very good TV, but you have bad programs, it's not interesting to see the TV. You want to see the program. That's why UN is very good, and you cannot create something better. But it's necessary to modernize the institute because the problems are different today, challenges are different, threats are different, and it's necessary to make it more operative. But Secretary General of the United Nations cannot do it. The management cannot do it, because only we, countries, member countries, can do it, and mainly 5 permanent members of the United Nations. That's why what I want to say, not give my saying that I am the most clever man and I will give you how to do it. What I am trying to say that it's necessary to work together, and not to think that we can postpone. We cannot postpone it. We cannot postpone it. Postponing, we create problems for us. It's necessary to make it very effective, and it is possible. Now about intervention. Look, I don't know about what intervention you mention in Russia, but speaking about not intervention, but about use of force and about sanctions, I think that it is possible to use force, and it is possible to introduce sanctions, but you may use force only with the authorization of the Security Council, UN Security Council, and also impose sanctions via UN Security Council. I am against, and not I am against, but I think that it will be big mistake, unilateral use of force and unilateral introduction of sanctions. Because if you do it, you destroy all the international cooperation in this, and it will be impossible to resolve the problem. It can, in Iraq, for example, we had sanctions during 10 years, and after that, we had war there. Sanctions cannot resolve the problem. Any solution, if you analyze the history of international relations, only may be political. If you impose, it can be for some period, but it will be not long-term solution. That's why today, in the world where we're living, it's necessary such a, it's more complicated, as in medicine. Maybe it's easier to cut the hand instead of months and years try to make the medicine. But it's more complicated, but it's more effective if we can reach such an agreement.
Thank you, sir. Julian Haddis, I'm from the State Department. You mentioned a number of myths that Americans commonly hold about Russian foreign policy. And I'm curious if you believe that there are similar myths in Moscow about American foreign policy that prevent the improvement in our bilateral relations that you would like to see. Thank you.
I'm sure that, but about that myths, maybe some former Secretary of State of the United States come to Moscow and he will tell how he see. But seriously speaking, I think that maybe not myths, but misunderstandings. And I will explain you why. It's easy to explain. Because after the Cold War, seriously speaking, we never had real strategic dialogue between our two countries. We spoke about very concrete conflicts, about very concrete issues. If you take, for example, statements of your administration, you will see, we want to work with Russia in very concrete points. Afghanistan, Iran, North Korea, and some other points. This is not strategy. This is very concrete issue, but not strategy. That's why if you don't have strategic vision, it's dangerous because you don't understand the final objective. This is speaking about Russia and about the United States. For example, I will give you, we agreed on the transit, Afghan transit. It's okay, but why we cannot have serious discussions about the future of Afghanistan after the withdrawal of NATO and American troops from Afghanistan? What will happen? There will be problems or not problems. If we have problems, and there will be problems, how to deal with that problems? Because we have our interest, you have your interest, but I think that interest coincided. And I can enumerate many important problems where, unfortunately, we don't have a serious dialogue. When I was Secretary of Security Council, I proposed to my colleagues here in the White House to create such a group of strategic group of strategic dialogue. Unfortunately, we failed. We couldn't do it. But I think that we need it because if you don't see the long-term interests and don't understand of each other, there will be myths, there will be speculations, because you have people speculating, we have people speculating. To avoid the speculations, we have to present to the public opinion, to our parliaments, our long-term vision of our relations. We have, our council, which I represent, we started to work on different projects with here in Washington with Atlantic Council, with Carnegie, with Brookings, about trying to elaborate some roadmaps of our relations, medium and long term, where we have interests, where our interests may coincide, where we may have differences. If we have differences, how to avoid conflicts. I think that such a dialogue is necessary, and we didn't have such a dialogue after the Cold War. That's why when you don't have dialogue, when you don't understand the other side, myths appear in my country or in your country or in any other country.